All right, let's dive into a chapter of history that feels like it's been ripped from a fantasy novel. It's a story that completely messes with our neat little maps of East and West. It's a puzzle, really, one that's been pieced together from some pretty surprising clues, like old coins and crumbling ruins.
And to get right to the heart of it, let's start with a question that just sounds, well, impossible, right? A Greek king, a guy raised on tales of Zeus and Achilles, a military conqueror, becoming a holy figure in Buddhism? It feels like two completely different worlds colliding.
But here's the thing, the proof is right here. This is a real coin, minted by a king named Menander I. And look at it. On one side, you've got everything you'd expect. The king's portrait, his name written in Greek. But you flip it over and bam, there's the Dharmachakra, the Buddhist wheel of law. This one little piece of silver just shatters our assumptions and forces us to ask, how on earth did this coin ever get made?
To solve that mystery, we actually have to rewind the clock about 150 years before this coin was even struck. And we have to start with a name you definitely know, Alexander the Great. See, his story doesn't end where most of our history books stop. In fact, that's exactly where our story kicks off.
So here's the super quick version. In 326 BC, Alexander pushes his army all the way into what we now call India. But then, just a few years later, he dies. His empire gets split up and his general Seleucus gets the eastern part. Eventually, he trades his Indian lands to the massive Mauryan Empire for 500 war elephants, great deal by the way. But the key thing is, the Greek presence to the north in a place called Bactria, that's modern-day Afghanistan, it stays put, and around 250 BC, that Greek kingdom breaks off and goes independent.
Now, it's really easy to picture this as just some dusty military outpost, right? A few soldiers in a fort, but the reality was so much more than that. The Greeks didn't just rule Bactria, they brought Greece with them, the whole shebang. And we know this because of one absolutely mind-blowing archaeological find.
Meet Aika Nome. This wasn't some fusion city. For all intents and purposes, this was a Greek city, a polis, dropped right into the middle of Central Asia. I'm talking a huge theater, a gymnasium for athletes to train, temples, fancy villas, the works. This was a thriving slice of Hellenistic life, literally thousands of miles from Athens.
And the stuff they dug up there, it's just staggering. A little bronze statue of Heracles, gargoyles carved to look like masks from a Greek comedy. Even the boring administrative stuff like tax receipts was all written in perfect Greek. This place was the real deal.
So from this Greek heartland in Bactria, they start expanding again, this time pushing back down into India. This creates what we call the Indo-Greek kingdom. And it's here that we finally get to meet the man on our coin, the king who really is the embodiment of this wild cultural fusion, Menander I.
Menander was, by all accounts, your classic Hellenistic ruler. He was a military genius, a conqueror who carved out a massive kingdom. The ancient writers tell us he pushed his armies even deeper into India than Alexander ever did, a real powerhouse.
But here's the twist. The main reason we remember Menander so well today isn't because of some Greek historian. It's because he's the star of a very famous Buddhist text, the Milinda Panha. The entire book is a deep philosophical debate between King Milinda, that's Menander, and a brilliant Buddhist sage named Nagasena. To put that in perspective, that's kind of like finding out a Roman emperor was the main character in a book of the New Testament. It's that big of a crossover.
And the final verdict of this epic debate? According to the text, after challenging every single point of Buddhist philosophy, King Menander did the unthinkable. He was convinced. He converted to Buddhism and became a great protector and patron of the faith.
And lest you think this is just a story from one side, check this out. The Greek historian Plutarch tells us that when Menander died, the cities in his kingdom actually fought over his ashes. They ended up dividing his remains among them so each city could build a monument. You know who else's relics were divided up like that? The Buddhas. This Greek king was being honored in the exact same way as a Buddhist saint.
Now, Menander was the superstar, no doubt, but he wasn't just a random fluke. He was the peak of a deep, fascinating conversation that was happening between these two cultures, a conversation that's literally carved in stone and stamped onto metal.
Take a look at the art from this period, from a region called Gandhara. It's a totally unique style. For the very first time, we see the Buddha shown in human form, and he looks like a Greek god. He's got these classical, chiseled features, robes that drape like a philosopher's toga, and sometimes he's even got a bodyguard who looks suspiciously like the Greek hero Hercules. And it wasn't just Buddhism mixing with Greek culture. Get this. This is the Heliodorus pillar. It was set up by a Greek ambassador named, you guessed it, Heliodorus, and the inscription on it dedicates it to the Hindi god Vasudeva, who is an early form of Krishna. You have a Greek official putting up a public monument declaring his devotion to an Indian god. That's just incredible.
And of course, it all comes back to the money. The Indo-Greek kings were smart. They minted these beautiful bilingual coins. On one side, you have the king's portrait and his name in Greek for the Greek-speaking world. You flip it over, and you've got text in the local Karastethi script for his Indian subjects. The currency itself was a bridge, speaking two languages at once.
So this cultural fusion, it went way deeper than just art and politics. It got right into the core of people's identities. It was a world where gods, names, and whole cultures got remixed in fascinating ways.
What you see happening is people actively trying to find the common ground. The Greeks, for instance, would hear stories about the hero Krishna and think, hey, that sounds a lot like our Heracles, and it went both ways. You start seeing Indian gods, like Krishna, showing up right on the coins of Greek kings. They were literally translating each other's belief systems.
And you see this fusion on the most personal level possible, people's names. We find inscriptions where Greeks are taking on Indian names. A Greek guy named Demetrius is called Dhammarakkhita in a Buddhist text, which means protected by the Dharma. They were building new identities, ones that honored their Greek roots, but also embraced their new home.
When you put it all together, what you have here is one of history's first great experiments in multiculturalism. For more than 200 years, this was a world where Greek theaters and Buddhist monasteries existed side by side, where people were fluent in multiple languages, and where ideas were exchanged with an openness that feels incredibly modern.
In the end, the story of this lost Greek kingdom just leaves you thinking. Here was this vibrant, globalized civilization that was almost totally wiped from the pages of Western history, only to be rediscovered piece by piece. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a world this rich and complex could just disappear from memory, what other lost stories, what other hidden worlds are still out there, just waiting to be found?